My name is Kelsey Howard, and I'm the Director of Art Services and Strategic Partnerships at CASH, and work with Brittany, the amazing Brittany, our Director of Communications. And now I just want to hand it over to our incredible speakers today. Let's see, can you please introduce yourself, Psych?
Hey, what's up, everyone? I am Phil Schaefer, aka Psych Style. Today I am singular. My plural is not with me today, as it says in the little slide there. I'm a muralist, graphic designer, entrepreneur of sorts, and I'm based out of Kansas City, Missouri. I specialize in large format murals and a lot of brand to brand integration with my style and their message.
And then we have Kara in the house today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I am Kara Martinez. Right now, until mid-August, I'm based in Austin, Texas, and then starting in mid-August, I'll be in Springdale. I work for Fusebox Festival, which is a contemporary performing arts festival based in Austin, Texas. It's about 18 years old. What I've been doing for them for the last 4 years is developing a brand new contemporary performing arts festival called Live in America. That went up just this past June for 2 weeks at the Momentary. And there's some people I think one of our graphic designers is on this with us today. My background is in performing arts and theater. I grew up as like a DIY experimental theater artist in Austin. I worked in the evenings. My day job, I was a school teacher for 11 years. In my mid-30s, I got real damn tired and I moved to Minneapolis. In Minneapolis, I did a doctorate, and then I started working for theater companies there for about 6 or 7 years. I worked at Penumbra Theater, which is the nation's oldest Black theater company. And then for a while, I worked at the Guthrie Theater, which is one of the nation's sort of big, crazy big theater companies. One of its largest nonprofit theaters. But I transitioned back to Austin to lead Live in America. In the next year, Live in America will become an artist residency program that's based out of Springfield.
Thanks so much. And you may have seen in earlier slides, Lisa Marie Evans, I'm sitting in for her today, so I am not Lisa Marie. But so glad, Phil or Psych Style and Kara, that you are here with us today. So let's dive into talking about this topic of talking about your work and also building relationships. So I think the best way to start talking about both of those things is just getting some examples of your projects and how they have come to be. So Psych Styles, let's start with Psych Style. Let's start with you.
Okay. Am I looking for my slide prompt here or am I freestyling? Ah, there it is. Yeah, so let's take it way back to the 90s. So here I am doing my classic form of self-promotion, which is literally putting up stickers and propaganda around the streets. You can tell how young I am by the roots on my head and how short they are. So I'm probably like 22 in this picture. This probably is from about 22 years ago, 23 years ago. But I started off as a street graphic designer or like an urban propagandist. And that was how I got my name out, was putting up all kinds of social propaganda, freedom of speech things, some things that question the military's moments, or motives and things like that. So I was just kind of this guy doing street propaganda. It was on the fence of graffiti. It wasn't really tagging, but it was more sticker slapping. So this is just something I did to get my name out there and just kind of be a part of the hip hop scene that I was doing. Fast forward 20 something years now, and I still do this, but I do this for clients mostly now. And so I think the next slide might show me more in my like client format form. Well, no, it shows this one. So what I've grown into from my student days at the Kansas City Art Institute is now to be a professional muralist with my partner, Holly Hayden, who is probably in her office taking calls somewhere else now. And we two together are Psych Style Industries. She, helps me paint and do things. She's also my contract writer and my admin. And I say all this to say that all the things that you might see in this slide, they don't happen in a vacuum by myself in the studio. It really does take a lot of teamwork to do something at a scope that what you see in front of you. So what you're seeing in front of you is a mural from 2017 on an Urban Youth Academy baseball facility. This was a partnership with the city of Kansas City. It was a 1% for the arts program. So 1% of this build out for this building went to the arts, which means I got 1% of that to make this mural. And then the Kansas City Royals also had a piece of this. And so this is a great partnership. And what the idea of this mural was to talk about Kansas City and youth baseball all together. And there's lots of little Easter eggs in it. There's my number when I was a kid growing up. There's a tribute to my aunt who played softball. There's the Juneteenth flag in there that people weren't aware of until a couple years ago. So there's all these little shout outs. And that's what I love about this traditional style of muralism. And it really is about storytelling. It's about community building. And so everyone bringing their kids to this area to enjoy the park or to talk about baseball, they're able to kind of soak up a little bit of the stories. And I'm working on a little kind of a legend that tells people what this is. But working on this project was definitely interesting because I'm working not only with the city, I'm working with J.E. Dunn Construction and the Royals. And so having to manage all those relationships could be daunting if you're not aware of it, but it also is pretty like telling to say, okay, if I made it through all of that, I could make it through anything. I just ran into one of the leads of the construction project a week ago. He was like, oh, do you remember me? I was the one. And I was like, oh yeah, man. Like, you remember those folks that you sweated through and you told, oh, that's going to take me 3 weeks to paint this. And 2 months later, you're like, here we go. So yeah, this mural helped me build a lot of relationships with contractors, the Royals, and the city as well. Oh, this is so interesting. So I got a call the other day to repaint number 32 and number 10. If you're familiar with Chiefs Kingdom, Tyreek has been talking mess online or in his podcast, and I think the Chiefs got wind of it and they're like, no, buddy, we're taking you out of the mural. So I was recruited by the Chiefs, which is one of my clients. I work with the big three here in KC. That means Royals, Sporting, and Chiefs. I'm working on the new women's soccer team, KC Current, hopefully, and maybe the small Monarchs team. But really, I've dived really head into doing art for sports teams, which has been great. As a sports fan, someone who grew up playing sports, to be able to use my artwork and this ability has been amazing. And not a lot of people would kind of put art and sports together, but there's an amazing and massive market for this type of work. So this was painted on the eve of the second trip to the Super Bowl before we went to Tampa. And so this is about 40 feet tall, 40 feet wide on the side of a distillery downtown Kansas City. Yeah, we painted this over, in between Christmas and New Year's. So there's certain clients that are going to get your attention during those times of the year. Other times you're like, no, thank you. But we were all excited about going back to the Super Bowl. So we, put our best foot forward for this one. So oh yeah, you visited, awesome. There's lots of photos with this. And I love to take, screenshots of my Instagram feed that show this. So one thing about what I love about my job is that one thing is the next. I am a digital designer first and a muralist secondly. So everything that I've done that's a mural starts off in a vector format some way. One of my clients is Oakley, and they hired me to paint the mural that's behind this kid. And then that mural became a poster, which became an installation, became a thing. So I think that's what's awesome about being able to be multifaceted in your designs and in your abilities to say, okay, the client wants one thing, but we sell them on 5 other things, and our relationship is still going strong to this day. So this kid you see there wearing the Sutro lights, he bought those $180 something glasses, and he got a free poster that I designed that features Patrick Mahomes. And then everyone who just bought a regular poster or regular sunglasses, they got the white one on the other side. So it's a fun way to show how the different ways you can integrate the design from starting off as a poster and then, or as the mural and turning into a poster later on. Let's see what's next. All right, so yes, here's how that progressed. And so Oakley is like, well, what are you doing during the Super Bowl? We're like, nothing. Great, let's go to Tampa. So we spent, a really interesting time in Tampa. This is, still height of COVID. We're down there in February 21. And it was a whole different world from being kind of locked down in Kansas City, and it's wide open in Tampa. And so we saw our hotel on TMZ as a super.
I think we might have lost you. Phil, if you can hear us, we'll hopefully get you in a minute. We'll hang in there for just a minute. Well, Brittany, if he's having a hard time reconnecting, I almost wonder if we could come back to him in a little bit to finish that thought. Kara, would love to hear your answer to the question about projects you've been working on, how they've come to fruition.
So I'm just going to really primarily focus on one project because I worked on it for 4 solid years. And I will say a thing that's aligning with what Psych was getting at, that even as I worked on it, I was hustling in other ways. I teach in playwriting and directing at UT Austin. I also teach in art management. I was working as a performer and a dramaturg. I was reading grant apps for national foundations. And that's just the side hustle. But the real full-time work was Live in America. Live in America is, hopefully will be again, a festival that all communities gathered in one place. It was 9 communities, folks from Las Vegas, the Diné, Pueblo, and Apache people from Albuquerque, New Mexico, El Paso, Juarez, New Orleans, Northwest Arkansas, Sumter County, Alabama, San Juan, Puerto Rico, and Detroit, Michigan, all came together to make a festival. What was unusual about that festival was its curational and production models. And this is a thing that I love to think about, which is when we ask folks to bring their community, to bring their true selves into historically white institutions, in the process of translation, how are we failing to recognize that some of what is happening is non-translatable, and in fact we have to change how we curate and how we produce so that those communities can best be seen and heard. So what we did for Live in America is that every community had its own curational or leadership team. We called them facilitators. Each community decided how many leaders they wanted leading the project. They didn't have to be professional working artists, though some were. There were teachers, there was a librarian, there was a dude who worked at Google. They were there, they were all over the place. They chose their own programming. They selected their own artists. They drafted their own budgets. They wrote their own contextual material. They shaped the contracts that we created with artists. And we allowed every community to contract each artist individually, which meant that artists didn't already have to belong to an institutional form or organization in order to participate. And what that gave us was a festival where you had a series of performances that were quite different from one another. None of them, even though it's a performance festival, none of them would I call theater. I would call it, I would call it performance or cultural performance or ritual tradition. We had a queer powwow that focused around traditions from Albuquerque and Native nations from across Turtle Island. New Orleans threw down for 10 hours with street style performance that goes back hundreds of years in New Orleans history. Everybody did the thing that they do when they're not worried about pleasing other people. And that was the kind of point of Live in America. If we go through a couple of slides, you can see some folks from the Las Vegas community. Some of these are actually in Vegas. This is the artist Justin Favela. His work has actually been at Crystal Bridges. He works largely in Piñada. He was at State of the Art. He's been in residency at the Momentary, but this is us in Vegas hanging out. We'll talk about hanging out in a little bit as a form of pitch. But there's a video, and we'll see if it works, to give you an idea of what Vegas is. If we'll go one slide more, to give you an idea of what Vegas's performance looked like. So we'll try. It was a little, it's kind of working. It has sound. The sound is useful on this, if we can make the sound go. Doesn't look like it's going. Well, this gives you an idea of the performance. This was all over the tower in the momentary. It lasted for about 4 hours. Audience would wander through. It was also in the courtyard. It was an installation style piece. It was performance art. These are body cameras. Oh, there's some sound. There's street performance. That's Justin Favela as Elvis.
One time for the people in GC, 2 times for the lady in the big feet, 3 times for the brother with the flat top.
There's projection. But the idea for Vegas, what they wanted to capture was what the Fremont street experience would be, if you've ever been to Fremont in Vegas, and how that might live as performance inside another art institution. So this thing they'd never done this before. They installed a world of signage that Justin and his team built to invoke Vegas. But that was kind of the thread of the festival in general, was that every community was empowered to present their story however they liked. A lot of the stories were joyful. Because more than 80% of the artists in the festival were people of color, we had a lot of conversations. Historically, white institutions often ask people of color to perform their trauma. And we had a lot of very explicit conversations about that. That's not what we wanted. We wanted them to decide for themselves the tone and purpose of performance that they were sharing with others. But so this is a project I've been working on. It took about 4 years to do this. Part of that was COVID and COVID delays, but part of it was none of these folks are necessarily touring artists who tour these shows in any regular way. So it takes quite a bit of time to build relationships and build trust and build infrastructure to get the projects in a place where they can live outside their own communities. And we'll get into that relationship business and what that looks like more in a second, but I'll turn it back, Sykes back, I think, and we'll turn it back to him and let him finish what he was talking about.
Hey, thank you very much. Sometimes you got to roll with it. Power just went out.
And we're right where we left off with you. You were talking about Tampa and how it was so open there and different. So I think that's when we lost.
Is that where you left off? Oh
Yeah.
man. Okay. Well, the point that I was trying to make was that here I am in this, sports atmosphere. Everyone's coming to cheer for the baby goat or the old goat. And somehow there's an artist that's at this table signing autographs for random people who are collecting art and expensive merchandise. So it's just a weird place to find an artist in certain instances where, my goal for that weekend was entertain fans and to draw pictures for people. And it was cool to have an all expense paid to go and cheer on my team there. I think these are sometimes places that, artists don't think that they'll end up, or they don't anticipate there being a need for this type of art and design. But yeah, I just wanted to show you the base of my kind of commercial work that allows me to do some of the other projects, that are dear to my heart as well. So I love what I do, and I'm happy I get to do it. But these commercial clients, they definitely fund other endeavors that I get to do as well. So I think those are other slides coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, and it was actually perfect timing because then we got to talk to Kara about Live in America.
Oh, I love to hear that about people asking you to perform your trauma.
Oh.
I mean, that's such a powerful thing with folks that have to think about, even it doesn't have to be ethnic groups. It could be women to come and talk about certain, really triggering things or all kinds of stuff. And folks have to realize that you got to have a quiet conversation before you start sending out a big blast email about that. And then also just, there's history of all peoples all year long, not just February, not just, March for other folks anyway.
that's a different
Yeah,
story.
that was what was amazing. Like the institution was like, how did you get so many people of color? I'm like, well, I made friends.
Yeah.
And that's not a thing, like you do that that's a long-term relationship, not a transactional relationship.
Yeah, definitely cultivating that is thing. I mean, I also facilitate career growth here in Kansas City. We call it Artist Inc. Some of you might be familiar with it. I'm sorry, I'm disarming my security system. But we talk about being good eggs. And that's just, like you're saying, we don't do work with assholes. If you're a good egg, it shows, and you continue those conversations with folks in your basket, and you really are able to grow just by, hey, we'd like to work with Phil or Psych, let's call him again. So sometimes it doesn't matter if you're the best at what you do, as long as you're the best person to take on that job and help everybody get what they need done, or, facilitate the process of the project.
Yeah, and maybe this gets us to our next topic. Actually, it's transitioning.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Take it.
Take it. Yeah, you want to keep rolling with that side?
I'll let you go. I'm kind
Okay.
of getting my lighting situation going.
It's interesting because this started out with Lisa Marie. She's like, like the word pitch came up, and I was like, oh, do I deal with any institutions that actually use pitches to create or program, whatever size institution? And the answer was no. Be it the Guthrie, which has a $30 million budget, and when I left was putting up 30 something shows a year, or Live in America. Like none of it was pitch based. It was all relationship based and community based. And my two rules that I've developed in terms of like who I want to work with and how I want to work with them are pretty simple. And the first is like who has a deep connection to their local community. And then my second rule was, so if that is one piece of the Venn diagram, then the other piece of the Venn diagram is no assholes. And where those two circles overlap, that is how I plan projects and how I want to work in the world. As Sai kind of said, the reality of the field is that it's not necessarily about some sort of perfect talent that you were struck with a wand and that made you the ultimate artist. A lot of it actually is about not being an asshole. And when I teach graduate students in playwriting and directing, we talk about this a lot because their egos are so egolicious. But we spend a lot of time talking about not being an asshole, and then understanding the context in which their work lives. So the context of their local community. So be that relation, who they're in school with, who their local town is, who is in their field, who is around them. And making sure that they're building good relationships across all of that. And then that is, in my experience, is what gives rise to more and more work. Being authentic about who you are and where you're from and what you want to do, and then not being an asshole. So if we go in these slides, we'll go forward a little bit. Let's see, a little more. We'll go to the next slide. Okay. So this is an example of how building relationships work. So every community in Live in America redesigned the logo for their own purposes. So this was the logo for San Juan. And how things would work, how the whole program was built, is I moved back to Austin. We worked for about 6 months. And the idea initially was that a bunch of very well-known national curators would get together and curate a festival. And about 6 months in, I saw all these folks in one room. They were, no joke, all white, primarily men. They all kind of had on the same linen outfit. And I just was like, no, it doesn't matter if they're a group. They're still going to produce the same kind of outcome. And so I went to my dear collaborator and friend, Ron Berry, and was like, we have to start over. We have to scratch the whole thing. So we're scrapping all of it because we're not doing the work that we said we were going to do and that we're funded to do. And so then it began with asking this question of who do we know that has a deep connection to a community that was not New York or LA and that's not an asshole. And I just got on the phone and started making phone calls. I end up in San Juan because one of my former undergraduate students at the University of Minnesota is from Puerto Rico. And I called up Alex and was like, Alex, and I knew he'd just been in Puerto Rico and I knew what kind of world that he lived in and what his basic nature was as a human. I was like, who did you mean Puerto Rico? Who did you like? And we just had a long phone conversation about humans. And he was like, I think you should talk to Marina Reyes Franco. And she's actually a curator at the Contemporary in San Juan. You should just get on the phone with her. So Marina and I had like 6 months of phone conversations just talking about artists in Puerto Rico. And then Ron and I flew over. So we'll go through the next few slides. We visited Puerto Rico. These are all photos I took while in Puerto Rico. That's Old San Juan. We'll back up a little. You can see a flag. I mean, whether or not Puerto Rico is an independent, is a state or it doesn't want state. I mean, that conversation is alive and well. So that's a mural that's getting at Puerto Rico's need or lack thereof for statehood. Go to the next slide. That's Santurce. This is a guy we talked with who we were just hanging out in Santurce. Next slide. Which is a neighborhood. People were like, you got to go to the beach, and you have to think about the beach and realize that it's public land, but that private American companies build really big resorts on it and try to close down the beaches to locals. That was super important, how beaches were being operated and tourism was operating in Puerto Rico. Next slide. This is the artist's house for two visual artists. We would just hang out there. We would eat fruit. We just talk with them. We met their family. We talked about education. What's important in all this is I didn't do any studio visits. For all of Live in America, I never did a studio visit. I would just go. I would hang out in people's houses. I would have coffee with them. I would just sit and listen about the conditions in which they were working, because it wasn't my job to curate. It was my job to think about how their work lived in that place and how I might support its transition and its welfare and its health inside a white institution. And all the translation processes across operation and production that I would need to do to make that happen. So we just hung out a lot. I would say that the way that the sort of theory around Live in America of how projects came to be was by hanging out and being with people and being present and having conversations. And the curation, what the piece became, was kind of in some ways an afterthought to building the relationships in the first place. So we go one more slide. I think this should be a video of Puerto Rico's piece, which was a queer cabaret, a multi-generational queer cabaret. All these performers knew each other. Some have Latin Grammys, but yeah, they're all over the spectrum. So let's see if this one will play.
Exorcizan mis demonios, puerta abierta el inconsciente, al laberinto de la mente. ¡Agarra la tele! ¡Agarra la Please get drunk, yeah. Get drunk, but sometimes drinking is a healing process. Aunque al otro día te despiertas bien mala y no llegas a la responsabilidad de meter Ramón.
I'm reminded in watching this, I had never seen any of the performances at Live in America until they arrived. It was, I mean, this is what the communities chose. And when you give people that power, then you can't go back and edit their choices they made. So it was semi-terrifying always. But this was like a 2.5 hour extravaganza party with a lot of bar breaks in it. And it was, I think for the momentary, a rather wild piece, but they were pretty game for it, except there was glitter. Oh God, they hate glitter. There was glitter in the performance space. And so we had to work through that. But the thing that I learned in terms of having relationships and then working through translations, if your relationship is strong, then it is easy to get people to hear the hard request you're going to make of them. So this body is Potro Deal, and they were performing in a kiddie pool of canola oil. And that's a big ask of the momentary, to put that kiddie pool on their mechanical up and down floor. But when you have the relationship, and when you have with them as well as the artist, and everybody understands the stake in that choice, then you have a greater likelihood of allowing folks, you know, to do what they want to do, and also to take better care of one another coming through both sides of that relationship. But again, that was across 4 years of work, probably 2 years of actual pretty hardcore work on production and planning. And the residency program is set up so that these relationships don't go away. It would be really heartbreaking, actually, to me personally, if we just built a thing and then it was over. So the residency allows a lot of these artists to circle back through Northwest Arkansas and to build in a very small, intimate scale relationships with local folks in that community. Yeah, Psyche, you want to take this now in terms of relationships and community and all that goodness?
Yes, please. Yeah, shout out to the momentary. I was just there last weekend seeing Run the Jewels and Big Boy from Outkast with Sleepy Brown. So definitely an awesome venue. I hadn't been there before. That was my first time. Yeah, let me back up and talk about Jay Wiz. That's who you're seeing on the screen right now. And we're talking about pitching your work, and the idea behind that. It's like, how do you get people with the access to the things to allow you to do the things you want to do? In my line of work, instead of writing grants, I do bids. So I apply for RFPs and Qs. So requests for proposals or requests for qualifications. So the baseball mural that I showed previously, I had applied for that that RFP, I think. I had to put together a proposal for it. And then I was chosen out of the top 3 people who were on that list. And then boom, you're off to the races to finish things. When I'm working on client work, for instance, the Chiefs, they'll say, all right, we want a giant red mural with these players. And I'll say, well, give me access to all your photos. I have access now. Then I find the 4, pictures I think I like best, and I arrange it, roughly. And I say, here's what it's going to look like, and I'm going to do my thing. And they're like, okay, all this is approved, because each client's going to approve different things differently. The Chiefs just want to make sure that you can see their numbers, or the players are the players they want to, represent. When it comes down to just kind of asking random people, can I paint this wall? Asking the Missouri Department of Transportation to paint this wall of Jay Wiz was actually quite an easy thing. And it was especially easy because I have a great relationship with the media director from the Kansas City Streetcar. So Streetcar Donna put in a word and said, hey, my boy Sykes going to holler at you about this thing. I've already been vetted. If Streetcar Donna says I'm cool, we'll listen to him, I guess. And so it was actually easy to get this approved. I just need to show them a rough sketch and say, hey, I want to do this. So what is this? So this is a mural. It's about, 75 feet long, maybe 22 feet tall at the center, and it is curved. And it curves along the side of a road near a fire station in an apartment building. And who is Jay Wiz? Well, that's James. He's like a local community dude who's just a guy on his bike, and he's got multiple bikes. You see he's got a different bike in the photo of him actually standing next to his mural. But the idea was to honor someone who was still alive. There was, you know, everyone knows about the rest in peace murals that happen throughout the city, but how about we honor someone who's still with us? And that was the concept behind this. Is just I wanted to do a freestyle kind of graphic piece in the background, my getting some practice in painting a figure that I don't often do, that wasn't, you know, a player or something. So just a little bit of a style research for me, and you know, an experimental piece to me, even though it's not that crazy looking. And they were fairly game for it, and they were like, "Sure, go ahead and finish it." And it took me about 6 months to finish this thing because I was working in between jobs, and it was great to see that the community would come out when I was there, and they would be like, "Oh, you're back. You're gonna finish it today." And I was like, "No, I'm almost done." And so every now and then, folks would come out and they'd want to meet Jay Wiz, and they were really excited about it, talking about cycling. So it was a fun thing. Like, no one asked for this mural in this community. I just showed up and did it. But it worked out that everyone was all about it. So I really did get lucky. But I'm also putting something in the community that isn't, it's good vibes. It's a guy on a bike. You know, you're not gonna get mad at that. Of course, police were called on me at least once, and the officer drove up and it was like, wait a second, this is what they called about? And I was like, yeah. So I have cones, I wear safety gear, high vis. You know, I look like a construction worker when I paint murals, so I don't look like I'm not supposed to be there. So it was funny. The cop was like, okay, all right. And then I never had any issues again, even with the, you know, other folks coming and going. So it's a good example of just me taking a shot on an idea that I had in the back of my mind. And it was funded through other projects that I was working on. So, I mean, this might have cost me about, oh, who knows, a couple $1,000 maybe in projects or process and time. But to me, it was like I already had it set aside from other things. If we want to go through, I'll show you the piece that I'm super excited about. That is a basketball court dedicated to, unfortunately, someone who is not alive. But the story is equally important. When this loads up, you're going to see me and my team painting a basketball court here in east side of KC, Missouri. And this basketball court is dedicated to the life and the memory and the sport that Ryan Stokes loved. So Ryan Stokes was a young man gunned down by an officer in the Power and Light District about 8 years ago. He had a phone and it was his phone and he was running the other way. Someone thought he stole that phone and they shot him in the back. That officer got off with a retirement party and a bonus, and the family has been seeking all kinds of reparations ever since. I was brought to the attention from some students at the Art Institute that we collaborated with it. So shout out to Yup Yup Designs, that's Chris and Sam Yates, and they partnered with me to come up with a way to really pay homage to him, Ryan, and his family. So let's go to the next slide and see the photos of this, because this video is not going to load. This gives you a context of the scale of it. Right. Yeah, this is so powerful for me to see now. So his daughter Naraya is there with the mask on to the, I guess, the right of her mother, of his mother, and that's Nareen Stokes, and his dad is there, and the Chiefs, and you see the rest of us kind of gathered around, and the owner of the park is Chris Harris, and you see him in the white. That guy with the bald head giving a hug to that guy, that's Ryan Stokes's, that's his high school basketball coach. And man, this meant a lot to do. So this was funded and partially by donations from the lawyer group that was putting this together. Chris Harris just said, hey, you can feel free to use my parking lot. I've got some money left over. And then all of the rest of the paint that we bought was purchased by, you know, myself and Holly. And this thing probably cost, gosh, you probably valued it somewhere $20,000 in expenses and things like that. But it's really invaluable. The fact that the family was able to gather here, dedicate the court to Ryan, and just to have a moment of happiness and get to shoot the first basket on it was awesome. So now people get to enjoy what Ryan's life was about. And yes, we want to bring attention to injustice in the police system, but this moment was not about, I guess it wasn't about protests. It was about coming together as community. And so we call this project a restorative justice project. Go to the next slide, please. I want to show you some details of the actual design. So his favorite shoe was Jordan, so we did like a take on the Jordan 1s with some feather wings on it. They called them fatback, so the fatback is there in the lower right, and then it says "Rest in Peace" at the top there. He wore a wooden cross on his neck most of the time, and so we represented that as well. And then he's got a lot of people fighting for him, and so that's why that fist is still there. And so his lawyer team and his parents, they're still raising awareness and hoping that this doesn't happen to other youth anywhere in America. And so this is just an amazing project to be a part of as an artist who works in the community and does just a ton of commercial work. And you might think, oh, you're just a guy that works for clients and corporations, but this is the type of work I love doing. And it's because I do all of those corporate jobs that I'm able to just not worry about the expenses. So yeah, in the future, one day I could write a grant for these type of projects and do things, but I operate in that business to business world. And so it's easier for me to take on 2 or 3 other corporate jobs that are just, paint this gym or, do this logo or paint some bacteria on this wall. These are all real things. And, be able to put aside money for the projects that I want to do. So I think it's really important to think about that in your own practice, that one, it's okay to just take on work to work. No shame in having a jobby job. And 2, it's also, set aside some real passionate ideas and projects that you want to be a part of so that, even might take 4 years to happen, 3 years to happen, but seeing them come together, I think it really will inspire you and the rest of your folks that you're working with to keep going. Do I have any more slides in here of mine? Let's see what's next.
No, you don't.
Okay, good. Well, that's kind of the breakdown on that piece there.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you, Brittany. So yeah, next question is just what is the language that you use when you are talking about your work? Since that is, that's the theme of this session today, is talking about your work and building relationships. So, what's the language you use? And I know, Kara, what you were saying about pitch, but
yeah, it depends on who I'm talking to and what the situation is. In my mid-30s, I went back to grad school. I'm 47. I went back to grad school and was trained to speak like high art, and have a degree basically in critical theory. But having lived a career that involved lots of young folks prior to that, I am highly aware of language that doesn't translate and can't be heard. So I was super grateful to receive that time to just think about work, but was also always aware of how words, crafting, sentence structures, paragraphing, I taught English, so here we go. How that is both welcoming and how it can also be really off-putting. So when I think about my work, I think about who is my audience, and I code switch my language accordingly. My dad is Mexican and was a giant fan of explicitly teaching us to code switch. We grew up in like profoundly rural East Texas, which is a very particular place. And he was really interested in us knowing how to code switch as also a mechanism of being safe, given where we grew up. And he didn't ever say those things, but now I'm like, oh, this is what he was doing. And also like humor as code switching also. And so I just think about, I had a meeting with the Mellon Foundation. I know I've done research. I know that guy who's leading that meeting has been in university settings. I got on his webpage. I read how he writes about himself. I speak that language back to him. When I am teaching, I use very practical language and very simple language, and I mark things with lists, and we use lots of real world concrete examples to get at ideas. It really just depends on who my audience is, how I use language, and I go and always read how they talk and try to reflect that back at them. I look at the projects they've supported or worked with in the past, how those projects talk about themselves, and understand that this is the world of language this person is working inside of. And if I want to be heard and listened to, that at least in part, I have to live in that same kind of world myself. So I also can be very casual and goofy about it. And like being able to code switch across all of those is actually really calming to me. I don't want to live in any one of those modalities. I want to be able to switch. So I switch depending on who I'm with.
And can you just, before I pass it over to you, Sai, can you elaborate, Kara, on how you maintain your authenticity in that code switching situation? Because it's interesting, just yesterday we had a session about writing about your work. And somehow it didn't feel like, uh-oh, I need to be careful about code switching the language for this grant versus how it appears on my website when I'm writing. Something about talking about your work and saying it back to someone the way they talk feels like it would be more challenging to be authentic. So how do you pull it off?
You can see I just did it here. I mean, people make like lots of assumptions based on, of course, the way you look, on the color of your skin, on whether or not you have an accent, like all of these sorts of things. And I've been negotiating that my whole life. I always, in a conversation, name where I'm from and how I grew up. Because I think often, like, there were 30 kids in my graduating class. The nearest actual Dairy Queen was 30 miles away. It was like that kind of place. And I think when you grow up in a space like that, it's hard to imagine existing beyond that kind of life practice. And I always try to name, no, I'm not there anymore. And here we all different, all of us have lived in many different worlds. And so I try to open it. I try to always name the different worlds that I'm navigating. I always name that I taught middle school, which is like a whole, once you teach middle school, you can do anything. Like that's just reality. And that I always try to layer in that kind of language. And that way, if I need to switch to something that is more grand speak or theoretical, that folks know that I can do that too, but I can do other things. I mean, code switching isn't about sticking to a single modality in conversation. It's about signaling that you can switch oftentimes. And that actually feels pretty authentically myself. I mean, I have a doctorate, whether or not, I mean, I finished that damn thing. So I shouldn't, I mean, and sometimes I hide that I have it with some people, but I have it, like I can do that. Also, I can like teach a 12-year-old. So I try to switch through those different modes. I watch real hard how different audience members receive it. I mean, I'm a trained performer. Like that's my real self as well, to like watching reception. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And people are complicated, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, Psych, what about you?
I love the fact that you said you researched that guy's writing and then you went in and spoke his language. That's absolutely true. I find myself speaking the language of contractors, architects, and marketing people, you know, and I'm speaking to you in the same way I speak to them, but it's just using the terminologies in the correct way that they would use. So if I want to get a look at the schematics of what this wall looks like, I'm going to ask the architect for the elevations. You know, are they elevated? No, that's just what they call them. You know, learning the words, the vocabulary words of all, tear down posters. Like, what are those? You know, those are things that they just give away to people. Or we talked about activations a lot. The people are like, what are you talking about activations? And that just means fan interactive things that happen for a brand. You know, they call it an activation. So yes, I don't think I would call it a code switch in my sense, but it's being aware of the language used by my clients. I guess is what's most important to me. And, being able to understand how to, make it seem like you haven't, that you're not brand new at this. You may be brand new at this, but you're going to understand that, like, hey, I can get through this with you, which is fun. I think about code switching sometimes as the way that people, will all of a sudden turn up their y'all speak or their like hood speak down and up and down. And I find it funny to just be the exact opposite in the spot. So if folks is like, yeah, you know what I'm saying, live and direct, Psych Steve's in the house, I'm going to be like, hello, I'm Phil Schaefer, you know, just to be funny. I think it's also just me, maybe being biracial, being, you know, from Brooklyn, New York, where you're surrounded by every culture in a way. And then you come to a place like Kansas City and all of a sudden you're the one that's different, you know, like you speak proper. I speak English, fool. So, you know, coming in to meet a bunch of country folks from KC, it was a real culture shock to me, you know, being from, you know, Flatbush, Brooklyn, and being 10 years old too. Like when you're, you know, heading into middle school, like you said, it's a trip. So anyway, my point about it all is like, you know, learn the language of the folks you want to do business with.
Yeah, and I don't think it's like a betrayal of your authentic self. Like one of the things I say to students is when you have, especially writing students, when you have 2 Pulitzers, then you get to do what you want and be your authentic self. But short of being in a room with artists who had Pulitzers, I've never seen anyone else actually get to do all that. And it's about, yeah, it's about what, like reading a landscape. And just because we're artists doesn't mean that we don't have to read landscapes, because we have a vision of the landscape we want to paint. Like you're still in context. You're always in local context.
Okay, I'm gonna give it back to Psych on this one. Yeah, just discuss your perspectives on air quotes, networking, building relationships authentically. What tips do you have for the folks that are participating in this chat today, or folks that are watching this recording later on?
Excellent. So showing up and being seen. It's been tough for us to do that in the last couple of years. And it's, you know, going to be tough as we, you know, go through different things. And not everybody's cut out to be the social butterfly in the room and to go out and to pitch your elevator pitch and to talk to people. And you don't always need your elevator pitch. You just need to be able to say, hello, I'm from KC. Oh, you're from KC too. Little things like that will catch people's ear. I would say that it's important to be at places. Holly and I, we love to go to all of the open houses. There's many gallery openings as we can see. We like to go see where younger people are getting their first shot at, say, a public art piece. You know, like I want to be in places where I'm not around everybody who's just like me. Either I want to be the person who's the brokest person in that room and I'm like looking for people who can hire me, or I want to show up as a mentor and say, hey, you know, I appreciate what you're doing here. Good job. And I want to be that person that big ups everybody else's project. But the fact of getting out and just being around, people knew me because I was the guy that put up stickers everywhere, but I was literally out like every other week, every other day doing something. And it can be taxing, but it's just kind of like that idea of you're putting your face in front of people so they recognize you. So when people say, oh, I saw you on the news the other day, and I'm like, yeah, good. You know, I'm glad it's, you know, that demographic is getting to see me there. You're not seeing me on TikTok, you're seeing me on like 41 News at night. So that shows up in different places. A cool example is Holly is working on the airport project here in Kansas City. She's helping 28 artists, you know, go through the process. And one of those artists happens to be Nick Cave. So we were like, you know what, let's go see Nick Cave's retrospective. Let's just go up there to Chicago and see it. So we pull up to the event and him and his brother and his partner are doing a massive fashion show. And after the fashion show, we come up and say hello. And Holly's like, hey, it's me. And Nick Cave, of all people, is like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't email you back. I'm going to get you. And it's like, no, dude, we just came to say what's up and we want to be important to, you know, the process of what you're doing. You know, just last week, we're in Bentonville and saw his talk at Crystal Bridges and came up and say hello again. And now he's like, okay, I'm putting together that you two are around doing stuff and you're not just a face behind a screen. And we introduced him to some more Kansas City artists. So not everybody has the ability to just kind of, you know, fly out to Chicago for the weekend to see a show or just, you know, troop down to Bentonville to see one show. But these are things that, you know, all of our corporate clients are allowing us to be able to do. And I think that we're trying to take advantage of those times to just go put our faces in front of people to say, hey, we, you know, want to network with you. And who knows, we're not trying to get anything from McKay. We just want to like, hey man, your work's awesome. we appreciate you working on the airport. We're going to help you be a part of that. So putting your face in other people's faces, always important.
Yeah, I want to understand saying hello, even to people who you think are fancier than you are.
Mhm.
And then reading their reaction and being like friendly and human with them. Oh, what's Rod Bigelow and I had the most fun time in the first few days of Live in America. I was wearing on opening night a long sequin duster. I mean, it's Vegas. And Rod was going to give up. He was, he's wearing like white guy clothes. And I was like, Rod, I think you should probably put on my sequins before you go give your speech. And he died laughing and he did it. And it's like having that kind of like real hello, like saying hello. Another thing I try to do is ask myself when the last time was that I made myself uncomfortable by what I was watching or feeling like by being in a community that I didn't quite know very well, like comfortability is a rut, man. I like it. I love some Netflix, but at some point that's going to cause some problems for me. So really sitting and asking myself in terms of art practice or community I'm involving myself with, like, when's the last time I made myself uncomfortable and took risks? And that helps me expand my network. When I begin to understand that risk and being a little discomforted actually is how I expand networks oftentimes. I want to circle back. Alan asked this great question about language. Oh, dude, this is kind of like my specialty. I don't shit stir early on, to be completely honest. I would never do any of the things that I'm about to tell you immediately. I oftentimes find, that marketing is where things get real ugly. I read every piece of marketing material. I read all copy on my projects. Part of it is the English teacher in me. Part of it is because I've found that that's where things get ugly. And I say things like, this language could be perceived as racist. Here is why. Here is the history. And I do it over and over. If it's 40, 50 pages of copy, I do it over and over again until the pattern is clear. And once I've done, I've been up on working on Live in America like 3 a.m, like having to do it for 4 hours before. As we were working through some marketing material. And that, if you are working with a well-intentioned white institution, that is a word they fear. So one of the things that you have to learn to do is understand what their fears are, and then you turn that on them. So a great example of this, before the queer powwow, I wanted the restrooms in the momentary to be gender neutral, because so many of the community members and artists who would be at the powwow are themselves genderqueer, and that I recognize is a big request. And so they took that to operations, and operations responded with, well, we'll change the restrooms further back into the museum into gender neutral restrooms. And I came back with, I'm like, well, that you can make that choice, but in doing so, you're shaming people for being who they are. So I need you to go back, and I'm not directly dealing with administrators at this point. I'm just coaching language. And I was like, please use the word shame, mention that this isn't just artist, it's audience. And do they want to be perceived as an institution that is shaming bodies of difference? Work like a charm. And so thinking through in a really kind of brutal way, it's the same kind of skill as like reading someone else's language, is as you get to know an institution, understanding what their fears are. And sometimes you got to use that fear against them. I try not to do it recklessly, but if I feel like I will do it when I feel like I am preventing harm to a community or an individual. I'll do it in a heartbeat.
Absolutely.
But again, I don't shit stir on the first day. I wait until relationships are established. I wait until they understand my own ease with language and speaking. And so that way, when I stir the shit, they don't necessarily read it as like, well, here's this troublemaker. but learn their fears. Take that time while you're making friends to learn fears of an institution, because it's
Yeah, that's great. If I may, I want to jump in with a tiny story that's similar in preventing something before it happened. And I've had younger people say, "Oh man, like why didn't you post that on Instagram? Why didn't you post that on Facebook?" And I tell folks, I don't need to talk to all of y'all. I just need to talk to the one guy who is about to do this dumb thing. And so we've stopped things behind the scenes that have happened before that happened. So a white developer from Denver has moved to Kansas City and bought up a lot of land in the hood. He's doing his thing. He's appointed white people kind of like caretakers of the arts and culture in this neighborhood. We're like, whoa, where'd y'all come from? Funny stories. But during the, social change movement, and everybody wanted to be a part of it, everybody wanted to put somebody's name on something or something painted on the ground. So it became a fad for people to paint the Black Lives Matter, street murals. Somebody in Kansas City decided to paint 6 of them here. You know how many of them still exist? Maybe like 3.5, because they all got worn off. Like, great effort for all y'all hard work. We could have painted 17 murals that stood the test of time and people wouldn't drive over that stuff. The same developer wanted to paint Lift Every Voice and Sing in a parking lot so that you could see that from his fancy bar on the rooftop of his building. He supposedly had some Chiefs player going to put some money towards it. My PR guy called me and was like, "Psych, man, I think you'd be great to do this. It'll be $10,000. I don't fucking need your $10,000 for this shit at all." Like, to be in a position to not even sweat 10 G's is a blessing. And it's a testament to like knowing yourself and being so comfortable with it. And I emailed this guy back and said, what if I was to paint the flag of Israel on the ground in front of your building so trucks drove over it every day? Imagine the American flag being trampled every day in front of you. How would you feel? And he is like, I didn't even think about it like that. And it's like, you put Lift Every Voice and Sing on the ground, you put a word that is supposed to be elevated, you put a phrase, you put our other anthem up there, you're going to do what, So it was literally like 5 or 6 paragraph email to him, no problem. And that didn't have to become an issue with city council. I didn't have to cuss out anybody on the internet. It was literally a one-to-one conversation, man to man. And that's what got to the point, and that's what solved it. And I haven't seen another street mural since. Sometimes it can be that simple, and sometimes you really do have to wrestle and you need other people. But I was glad that I was able to take on that like one-on-one and prevent like another shit show. I've stopped other artists from painting like Simpsons character Black Lives Matter murals around. Like, no. Cartoon characters don't die. Please don't paint cartoon Black Lives Matter murals around town. And they're like, thanks, Psych, I'm glad you mentioned this. And these are small times that you can reach out and use your voice for these things. Sometimes they matter real big when, there's property developers trying to make moves. And sometimes it's just your fellow artist who wants to help, but doesn't quite understand the connotations of what they're doing in the relationship to how I'm feeling, or other folks will perceive their work. So it's important.
Yeah, I love what you like. It's the thing, it's preventative medicine, man.
Yeah.
Like, we can have a whole other session about the end of capitalism and white institutions and whether or not that will happen in our lifetime. But until that point, oftentimes what I find is the preventative medicine that it's labor you have to do. We can get into Adrienne Marie Brown. This is social. It's a lot of heartbreak sometimes in labor, and it'll be 3 a.m. and I'm crying because I made yet another comment about something being racist. But that labor kept a lot of other people from being hurt. And I feel like that's part of what I have to do and part of my calling. And I don't, until the systems that we exist inside of them radically shift, I don't see that my labor in that way changing. And I'd rather do it in that fashion than calling someone out on social media, because I don't know that changes much in the field that I'm in.
Absolutely.
So
Do we have any more questions in the chat? I have to look up and see how much time you got. What's going on?
And you know, we're pretty much out of time, so I wanted to see if I could put some pressure on both of you to give the just a couple ending sentences of encouragement about talking about your work, building relationships. Just sum it up a little bit for us, and then I have just a few final announcements before we say goodbye. So, Kara, what's your final encouragement for this group?
I was thinking about this morning about what if we thought about our work as living in a community? Like literally, like what communities does your work live in? And that's where you need to begin your talk. Who's in the room with you, who's down the street from you, who's across town from you, who else is in your field. And that if you will begin conversations in relationships in your communities, your work will expand and grow.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. I want to let folks know that speaking out like this, it doesn't come natural to everyone, and it takes a lot of practice and repetition. So me and Kara, we speak with a lot of passion, and we speak with a lot of confidence. But that confidence doesn't happen overnight. It is cultivated. It's been bounced off of many of loved one's ear before it hit the person who needed to hear it. So I would say lean on your friends, lean on your community, and practice being a spokesperson for what you think is good. And if you feel like you've overstepped your bounds once, think about it again, learn how to rephrase it again, and come back at it stronger next time. So your voice is always important. Remember that. Even though artists tend to be shy and they want to say, well, I don't know how this thing, make your voice heard, but also practice articulating the real points to what you're objectively trying to get across to folks. They will appreciate the fact that you're able to tell them succinctly what's up without a lot of ums or hyperbole about, how artists are. Just be like, this is how it is.
Rehearse, walk around your house talking to yourself for hours on end. That's me.
Yeah.
I talk to myself out loud to hear what I'm saying and to try to clarify.
Writing it down helps too. I've seen people give great speeches and they still use notes. Yeah. So all of these practices that people talk about public speaking, they come in the same thing when it is about talking about your own work and speaking in forms like this or even far beyond.
And writing goes so hand in hand with that practice of talking it through. So just a shameless segue and plug is one of the things that we're trying to do at Cash is to revamp our directories. So stay tuned. We are going to have a space for you to be in control of your own profile and how what your bio and your artist statement looks like on your own directory profile. So please be watching for that as we revamp it. Also, just spreading the word about what you're doing. The calendar is a great resource. And Brittany, if you don't mind sharing those with everybody on the chat, that would be awesome. But the calendar is something that we're building up too. And so please spread the word and use that as a platform to talk about what you're doing, what events, what programs you're involved in, what partnerships. And finally, I think all of you have heard me say to please be sure to connect to our newsletter. I think a lot of you are, since you've found out about this opportunity in this conversation. So let's stay connected.